on the logic portion of the quiz, ands and nots and ors and equivalencies. If you have something like this, write an expression that means A equals 12 and B isn't either 13 or 14. Something like that. You could do something like this. If A equals 12, now you can't do just or B not equal to 13 and B not equal to 14. That won't really work. Or you can't just put the and here and the or here. What you got to do is this part of it needs to be in parentheses due to operator precedence. So then you can do this. I've done something wrong. That's supposed to be an or. Right. So if A is equal to 12 and B is not 13 or 14, right? Because this is, pretend that's an equal sign there. That handles that. And then this handles that. So you just have to cluster this part together. Oh, I need to actually look up the quiz question that got the most wrong answers. Just a second. Something like this. Which of the expressions equivalent to A is not equal to B and C not equal to D? Well, the way this works is which has higher precedence. And has higher precedence, so it's the same as this. So if B and C are true, and then you OR all that together. So there were several choices like A and B. Well, that's not right. Right, I'm going to rule that one out right away. You know, nope. And there was another choice that started off like this, A or parentheses B ampersand C. Well, that one's starting to look good. And D, yes, that's correct. Just put parentheses around the and you're good to go. You have found the equivalent. But there was one more. Let's see that if there was more than one possible answer. A or B and no, C or D. That would be the case if or had higher precedence than and, but it does not. And has higher precedence. So we can't say that it's equivalent to cluster those. We can only put the parentheses around the and if we're trying to find the equivalent. If we're trying to rewrite it, sure, put the parentheses wherever you want. But if we're trying to match the equivalent, that's the only one out of that cluster that was equivalent. And so if x is supposed to be greater than 100 and less than 200, or is equal to 300. This is the condition that we're trying to write. So if we wanted to write that, if x greater than 100, ampersand, ampersand, x less than 200, or x equals 300. That would be the proper expression. Might need an extra one of these. Now, and having precedence means that it would get done first anyway, so we could conceivably leave that out. But either one of those would be true. And so, yeah, either one of those would be true. If you had the parentheses there around the and, or if you left them out, those would be the proper way to express that. And there was one more I wanted to cover. Yeah. If you're trying to write if A is not equal to B, there's actually three ways to do it. You can do this. If A not equal to B, that's the simplest one. If not A equals B, that's another simple one. Slightly less obvious. Or if A less than B and A greater than B. Now that's the most obtuse, but all three of those will work.
Do we have to recognize all three, or just?
Yeah. I mean, if the quiz question asks, is A, B, and C legal? Then you go, yeah, all three of those are legal. All three are the same as that. Now, when you're writing a program, just go with the simplest one, right? You don't need to deliberately try to choose the most complex one, but just recognize that this means if A not equal to B, this means if not A equal to B, which is the same, and if it's less than B, oh, this is impossible. I goofed on that one. What's wrong with that one? Is it possible for something to be less than A and greater than, or less than B and greater than B? Could it be below 0 and above 0 at the same time? No, so that's just flat out wrong. I should have written that with an or there. Now they're equivalent, right? Because if A is less than B or A is greater than B, you know that it's not equal to B. So those all three are equivalent.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Okay, so what I want to do is dip back into the idea of Windows forms just a little bit. I don't want to write a crazy complex form, but I want to rebroach some topics, especially since the quiz came up that has some questions over it. It'd be nice to have a little bit of a review. One of the ideas I want to show you is how to pop open one window from another one. And it's okay if you don't work along with this, or if you do want to work along with this, but I'm going to make a new Windows form application out of C#. No idea which lecture we're on. LM. Looks like L. All right, so say we have a form, and we want it to be able to launch another form. You've seen that before. You click on a button and it pops up another button. Well, you could do that. I need my toolbox, but once I get my toolbox on the screen, I can do that pretty easy. All I have to do is drag out a button that'll launch, the next thing that I want it to do, but I need to create my second form as well. So I'm going to go and I'm going to make a new form. I need my Solution Explorer over here so that I can right-click on it and say Add New Form. Add New, and all I did is click on the, I'll come back here. Push pin to pause it. See, I did right-clicked on the project and I did Add New, well, not on the project, but on the subfolder right there. Add New Window Form. And I'm going to make a new form. Right now it's got kind of a lame name. It's got Form 2 as its name. Well, what if I want to rename that? I could bring up the properties for it. I have the feeling that I chose, where's that property screen? There. If I find the name, I can rename the form to something else, but then there's also a text. And there's a difference between the name of a control and the text of a control. The name of a control is a variable. The text of a control is just what it shows on the screen. We could put anything in there. You know? We could put wowzers as the text. But if I find the name of it, you know, right now it's called Form 2. I could give it a different name, right? Like this is the, I don't know what dialogue it is, right? This is the payroll dialogue or something like that.
Before you go too
Uh-huh.
far, let me ask you the forms, how did you get to the forms?
What I did is I created a new form application like you and I were doing Friday or Monday. Remember that? And then I just right-clicked on that and chose Add New Form. That makes sense? We were already in the form designer, right? I just did File, New Project, and chose the Windows form. I know it looks different on this screen than it does on yours. You choose a desktop application from the little pull down there, and then you can choose Windows form. All right, and then right click on Lecture L and do Add. There should be an Add symbol. There it is. New form. New Windows form. Right there. And just click Add. And then if we want to, we could rename it. So the point here, and a quiz question is what can you rename these things to? Any control that you rename has to still be a valid variable name. Right? If I drag a button out and then I change its name, I can change its text to anything. I can put as many spaces in it as I want. But if I try to change its name, it has to be a valid variable name, which means no spaces, no numbers at the beginning of it. Just has to be a valid variable name. So button click is okay. Button underscore click is okay. Button space click would not be a valid name because you're not allowed to have spaces inside of your methods or your variable names. Like what would happen if I double clicked on this to create the new method, but there had been a space in the variable name? If it had allowed me, which it did not, then it would say that that was my method name, and that's an illegal function name, so you can't do that. Okay, so I have this form here. Hopefully I haven't totally messed it up. And I have another form here. I want to be able to launch this form from Form 1. So I'm going to go back to Form 1, and I'm going to drag a new button out. Just try to keep things straight. This is Form 2. I renamed it Wowzers. You don't certainly have to rename it Wowzers. Maybe I'll rename it back to Form 2, just to make it easy to follow along. So I'm going to go to Form 1. I'm going to drop a button out, and I want button 1 to be able to launch Form 2. So I'm going to double click on it, and I need a variable to hold the second object. Each form is an object. So this is going to be Form 2, and I need to give it a name. Why not Form 2 all lowercase? Equals new Form 2, parentheses in parentheses, semicolon. That creates the new form that's about to pop up. But since it's just a member of the class, we're not going to actually be able to see it yet. If I run everything at this point, I don't see the second one pop up, which is appropriate. I just want it to pop up the first one when it runs. But when I click button 1, that's when I want it to pop up the second one. So at that point, from my form designer, I want this button here to launch the other form. Well, launching it, it already is launched, but we could do this. If form 2 equals null, that might mean that that form is gone. And so I might want to launch it. I might want to make a new one. Form 2 equals new form 2, parentheses and parentheses. And mine has an uppercase O there. Yours probably doesn't, so don't duplicate my typing. Do whatever you need to do. It starts helping you type it right, so you'll be able to get it right. And then once it is created, we need to show it. Form2.show dialog, parentheses in parentheses. That'll show it. So when I click it, when I run it, and I click my button, it'll show my next dialog. I get another window. And since we launched it with show dialog, that makes it so-called modal. And modal dialog is one that you can't click around, right? I have to close this one before I can get back to that one. Now you can tab away and go to another thing. It's even worse when you make something that, you know, won't let you do anything else with the computer until you click it. But this isn't that bad, right? But you do, pardon me?
Sorry, what's that called when you can't click out of it?
Modal, M-O-D-A-L.
Okay.
Yep. So, show dialog launches it. Oh, yeah, whatever. Stop my debugging. Show dialog launches it as modal, meaning it can't be closed, or you have to close it before you can interact with the rest of the application. You can't bring the one from behind up to the front. Now, if we just made it show rather than show dialog, then when we launch it, you know, we can still come back over here. We could do something silly and make an application that just launched multiple copies of itself, right? Popped open a whole bunch of windows. But what if we wanted, I'm going to change this back to show dialog. What if we wanted this to, after we launch it, to make them fill in some value, and then to copy that value back over here? Right, like they're choosing a file or something, whatever this second dialog is supposed to do. So go to your Form 2 designer, drag out a text box from the common controls, don't need them all open there. I'm not going to even change the name of it, I'm not going to do anything to it, it's just I'm going to have that. I'm going to delete the button in Form 2 because it's not doing anything. But I'm going to leave the text box in Form 2. So Form 1, not sure where the Form 1 designer went. If you can't find a designer, if you've accidentally closed it like I did, you can usually come back over here and right click and do View Designer. But there it was. Okay, so I have my two forms open. This one's supposed to launch Form 2. And then they're supposed to type in something, and after they're done typing that, it's supposed to fill in something on Form 1. I don't care whether it's a label or what. Maybe I'll just drag a label out that it's going to fill in when they close that window. So clicking button 1 is supposed to launch Form 2, and then if they type something in here and close it, it's supposed to update Form 1. Well, this is where it gets a little bit weird and wonky, but we're ready for it. We're awesome enough to do it. And you know, you may not be able to remember how to do it on the spur of the moment, but you will remember that you can do it and then look it up later when you need to. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to add an event handler for the close box that triggers something in our original form. So when we click the close box in Form 2, we want it to trigger a method inside the Form 1 class. And so this is going to look a little bit strange, but it'll be okay. So in button 1, on Form 1, after we show the dialog, or before it, or something like that, we need to set the event handler. And so that's going to look a little bit complex, but it's not going to be too bad. When this form is being created, or after it's been created, form2 dot form closing. This is what we want to do when the form is closing. Except get rid of those parentheses, that's not accurate. And we're going to add something to it. We're going to say, on your way out, while you're going bye-bye, form closing plus equals new event. So new space form closing event handler, all with initial caps. And in parentheses, we need to give this method a call, a name. This dot form2 underscore close. In semicolon. Now we don't have an event named that yet, but we're going to create it. So down here we're going to write a method that when that form2 gets closed, runs something inside of form1. So private void hope I get this right. Form2 underscore close parentheses object sender comma event args e. See, I made it look exactly like this. It's not that I'm super smart and had all that remembered, but the event handlers all have a very similar syntax. Okay, and when form2 has been closed, what do I want it to do? Well, I want it to hide the original form, right? So it doesn't stay open on the screen. Like if I pop up a message box or something, I don't want the old form to be left on the screen. So I need to hide the original form. Form2.hide, parentheses in parentheses. And I'm going to get the data out of that text box that's on form2. There was a text field here, which was just called text box 1. It's easy to remember. So back over here, where's my program for form1? So string s equals form2 dot text. I'm not seeing my text box. Because it's a lowercase t. And Yolanda's version of Visual Studio compiles every time we make one of these controls have a lowercase letter. So Yolanda should have created it with an uppercase t. Even if it created it all by its lonesome with a lowercase, you have to rename it in order to get rid of your warnings. Okay, but back over here, inside the event handler for the close event handler for form2, form2 dot lowercase text box dot text. Well, why are you not popping up? Don't turn this into a real trauma. Maybe I haven't saved it recently, and that's why I'm not getting this to work. Rebuild solution. Close brace. Missing. Okay, I can fix that. All right, now maybe it's there. So string space s equals form2 dot. I'm gonna cry. The problem is that I need to be able to get to that control, which is right there. Pause the recording. This is stupid. Okay, so the problem is that under Windows 2013, when I created that field, it set its text box access level to private, meaning that the other one wasn't able to get it. If I change that to public, I would be able to get it to work. I really don't want to talk y'all through having to do that. I want to see if any of y'all working along with me on this, or if I lost you, we're not going to be able to handle it. But Simon, were you able to to follow along with where I am?
No, I'm pretty far behind.
Okay, okay. So what I wanted to be able to do is I wanted Form 1 to be able to grab that text field from Form 2 and be able to get to it. However, in Form 2, it is declared as being private. And to figure out where it was and where it was declared private, I had to come over here into the form2.designer.cs, double click on it and scroll down until I found that text box field definition. Text box 1. If I scroll down far enough, I'm going to see that it was declared as private. Right there. And if I change that to public, then I would be able to come back over here and I would be able to get that data out inside the closing thing. I would be able to say form2.textbox1.text, that gets that text from that field, and then I would be able to display it or change my label to it. This dot label1.text equals S. So whatever was typed into that field will now fill that in. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run and prove that, and then I'll make it off the case here. So button 1 the text of label 1 is set to that. Button 1 launches button 2. I type in something here that fills in that text box, which I not renamed, but I changed its access level to public. And then when I close it, it has been set to whatever I typed there. So the two forms are able to interact with each other via the fact that that field was set to public rather than private. That instance variable was set to public rather than private. And I'm not really expecting any of y'all to have actually been able to keep up with that, and that's okay. When I post the lecture, I'll warn the people at home that they don't have to do that. I would like to do one more thing, though, if we have time, and I think we do, is to make a form that if you hit the enter key, it triggers the button. And so, I'm just going to start fresh, brand new project, Windows form application, and I'm just going to call it L2, since we're currently on L. CS_lecture L2, Windows form application. And this is going to be pretty simple because all it's going to have is a text box. So I'm going to drag a text box, and it's going to have a button, and it's going to have a label to show the value of that squared. So whatever they type in here, if we click the button, it's going to display that value squared. But if there's something wrong with it, if they type in something and it's got an error, then we're going to change the background color to yellow or something to indicate that it's a bad value. So there's a couple things I want to do. One is I want to make it so that if they type in something bad here, it changes the color of the background to indicate that it's bad. And I want them to be able to click button 1 and have it square it and display the result there. And lastly, I want them to be able to hit enter on this thing and just have it run the button automatically, right? Because if you're entering a whole bunch of data, it'd just be nice to type, enter, type, enter, not type, click a button, add, come back over here and type again. Let's see if we can get all that to work in the next 15 minutes. So, I'm going to double click on this text box 1, and in the past that's been an error. We did not want to add an event for when the text box changed. But in this case I want to. Why? Because I want to try parsing it. And if the parse fails, I want to change its background color. Otherwise, I want to leave its background color alone. So I'm going to need to use try parse. For try parse to work, I'm going to need a variable to hold the result. So like double space D.
I'm on it.
And then maybe a Boolean variable to hold the result. Bool space OK. And now I'm going to use try parse. May as well get the string out. So string S equals this dot text box dot text. And then let's try parsing it. OK equals double dot, try parse, parentheses S, comma, out space D. Try to parse it, and if it succeeds, store it into D. But if it fails, OK is going to get set to false. All right. Let's see. Let's do this. If OK, great. We're not going to do anything. But what if it was not OK? If not OK, let's set the background color of that control. This dot text box 1 dot BG, or excuse me, back color equals capitals color, capital C color dot yellow. Just to let them know that there was an error. And let's set that label to the word error. So since I'm trying to do both things inside the if, I need curly braces. So this dot label 1 dot text equals quote error, because they didn't enter any text, so they weren't able to calculate it. Sadly, I'm going to wind up copying and pasting this into the actual button handler, but that's okay. But if it is okay, great. We're going to change the background color back to white. So else this dot text box 1 dot back color equals color dot white. So now anytime that that text changes, like if they type something and then step out of it, we should get an error. And it should change the background color. Let's see if that's true. So if they type in 1, 2, 3 and then hit tab, everything's great. But if they hit 1, 2, 3 or 1, 2, 2 and then type in an A, all of a sudden it's wrong, right? Because that's not a number. And it's not going to stop saying error until they correct it. Now, we ought to clear out the error label as soon as they correct that, right? So when we change it back to white, we ought to remove that error label too. So we actually need 2 blocks of code here. And I'll pause here and make sure everybody's doing okay. Change label 1 dot text equal to just empty string, just to clear out that error field. So that is, when they have letters in there, it says error, but if they backspace and type in a number, then that error message goes away. Another thing we could do is that if it's in an error state, we could hide this button, or not hide it, but disable it. Right? If they're typing in and it goes into an error state, we could disable the button completely. So if we're in an error state, if it's not okay, this dot button 1 dot enabled equals false. They can't click it. But if it's a valid number, this dot button 1 dot enabled equals true. I started to type in an uppercase T, but that's not correct. Lowercase t there. So if I'm running it, that button's enabled, but if I type in some letters, it grays it out and it says error. I should kind of move that error message right over here, right? And I should have a label saying what it should be, right? You know, and the error message could be a little bit better than that, but we're just showing proof of concept here. All right. Let's go ahead and make the button do what it's supposed to do, which is just to get that number out and square it and put that into the label. Now, since this button is not even enabled when the input is bad, we should fill it with a 0 to begin with, so that we always have good data. I think I'm going to do that by coming up here under initialize component and say this dot text box 1 dot text equals quote 0 or 1 or whatever default value we want to put in that number. And we could change the text of the button so that it said square, right? This dot button one dot text equals quote square, because that's what the button does, right? It calculates the square value. So this is the constructor for the form, and after it initializes the components, we can start changing the properties. So now when it runs, it's filled in with a 1, and the button is called square. And if I type in garbage, then it grays the button out. I can't do anything with it. And when I type in a number again, it's enabled again. So now my button handler doesn't even have to check to make sure it's valid data or not. We're pretty much guaranteed that at any point that this works, we have valid data. Now it's not that hard to go ahead and add some more try-parse code to the button handler, but it'll save us a couple of seconds to do that, to not have to. So I'm going to double click on the button, and in my button handler, I need to get that data out. So all I did is go back to the form, double click on the button to create a button handler, double space D equals convert dot to double parentheses this dot text box one dot text. Except that was supposed to be a capital T. Now we have a number and we can square it and put that into the label. Now I kind of did that the long way, the way that I had done it previous. I mean, not the long way, but in one line, and maybe I should have done it like this. String S is equal to, write this dot text box one dot text, and then just change.
Shouldn't matter because we already checked.
Right.
If it was okay.
Right. So I'm not checking to see if it's okay. I could have done it in that one line, but just for slightly ease of reading the code, I went ahead and broke it into 2 lines. Now D equals D times D. Yeah, there's other ways of doing that. And now let's make the label say that. This dot label 1 dot text equals quote squared space is space end quote plus D semicolon. And I'll be right back there. Maybe I don't like that squared is business. Maybe I should just put the value there, right? So instead I'm going to change that squared is text to just say D dot to string parentheses in parentheses semicolon. Yeah, I'm liking that better. You know, we don't even need that square button. We could calculate the square every single time we, we type something, so that as we type into, -12, it would display 144, and if we put in 2, it would display 4 there. But the last thing I wanted to be able to do, and it's going to involve, the slight more bit of wizardry of involving a key, of adding an event handler for it. Let's see if we can get everybody here up and running first before I go off and do that. So 2 more things I would like. One is I would like to be able to hit enter after typing in a number here and have that run the button. And the other is that after I click the button, I would like for it to put the cursor right back there where it was. Because if I type in 10 and I click square, it'd be neat if the cursor was here so that I could then type in another number without having to click it. So let's do that one first, because that one's real easy. Should be. I've said that before, huh? So I'm going to go back to the code, and in the button handler, I'm going to do this dot text box 1 dot focus. So text box 1 dot select parentheses in parentheses, and this dot text box 1 dot focus parentheses in parentheses. And I don't know why you're underlining. Okay, good, the underline went away when I saved it. So as soon as I click the button, it's going to be ready to go to let me type in something else, right? So I type in 123 and I click square. It's ready for me to, you know, back up and type in again. Now I could even modify it so that it selected all the text. I'm not sure what I'd have to do to fix that. I'm not going to engage in that, but you could look up how do you select specific parts of the text so that it would highlight the whole number and be ready to type in. Okay. Hopefully that worked for you. Next thing I want to do is I want to set it so that if you hit enter while you're in the text field, it runs that button automatically. This will probably be the last change we make. Oh, this is the point where we could conceivably run into an error, right? Because they could have bad data. I wonder what will happen. I haven't tried this before. If you're here and you hit the enter key, but this button is grayed out, is it still going to be able to trigger it? It might be able to. We might have a little bit more fixing to do, but I think we would just leave that alone anyways. Because what the button should do is it should also check the state of it with a try parse. Okay, so we need to add a key handler so that when the key is released, like if you type in a 1 and then you let up, it calls an event. And that event checks to see which key was pressed, which key was being released. And if it's the enter key, then we want to click the button handler. We want to call the button handler. So way up here in the form initializer stuff, we're going to say text box, or this dot text box 1 dot key, capital K, key up. When that key is released, whatever they typed, plus equals text box key up, semicolon. Now this is going to be the name of a function that we write here, text box key up. So we could call that anything we wanted to. So we're going to add that method right underneath here. I just called it a function. That's not correct. It's a method.
Should I have parentheses then?
Actually not, because it would call the function right then and there. It would call the method right then and there. Instead, we're specifying it. Just like we did when we were setting up in the close handler. Okay, so private void text box key up. It just needs to match whatever this was called. Parentheses, and this, again, this is going to look real similar. Object, sender, comma, key, event args with capital K, capital E, capital A, space E. And then inside our curly braces, we need to check, was that key the enter key? If parentheses e dot key code equals keys dot enter, if the key that they just pressed and released was the enter key. So if e dot key code equals keys dot enter, then that's our magic key. We want to call a button. First, we want to say that we handled the click, or we handled the event. So e handled equals true, semicolon. And then I hit Control S and it got rid of the error. And then button 1 let's check to see if that button is enabled. If parentheses this dot button 1 dot enabled in parentheses, then we're going to call button 1 click. This dot button 1 dot click, parentheses. Now we have a few events we need to handle because the click handler needs a sender and an event, but we can just set the event to null and it won't mind. So sender, comma, null. You gonna go away? Well, it is on the left-hand side. Well, all right, I'm going to call the event handler directly. This dot button one underscore click. That's probably the correct thing to have done anyways. Parentheses, sender, comma, null, in parentheses, semicolon. That seemed to have worked. So, if the button is enabled, we're going to then invoke the handler for it when we hit the enter key. Let's find out. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to hit the enter key, and it changed it to a 1. If I type in 56 and hit enter, it puts the square in there. If I just tab out of it, then it doesn't immediately run it, which would be good, right? We might have a whole bunch of fields that we want to let them enter by hitting the tab key. Alrighty. I think that's enough for here. I think we've demonstrated some good concepts. We at least conceptualize the idea of launching another form. You know you can do that. We talked about doing interform communication by making one of the variable, one of the instance members public so that you can pull data out of it, and by registering an event handler so that when that window is closing, you can trigger something inside your original form. And there's other ways of doing it than that, but that is one good way of doing it. And we have talked about like setting colors, doing error validation, setting the focus so that the focus gets set back to here anytime we click the button, even if it wasn't. And setting up an event, a key handler, so that if we type in something and then hit enter, it does that, runs that button. And we talked about how to enable and disable controls. And lastly, we talked about setting things up in the form constructor, like to set some default text up or to set our event handlers up. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with what we did. I think we covered a lot of material in just a short little bit of time. And if you don't remember it all, that's okay, as long as you remember that you can do it. Because if you remember you can do it, you can Google and figure out how to do it.